The Prophets are Halo's ugliest species, hands down, and I mean that in more ways than one. They're an ignorant, conniving, and power-hungry species, either too blinded by false faith to be decent individuals, or simply just too greedy for power. The fact that their face looks like a ballsack doesn't exactly help either. But what if I told you that that wasn't always the case? What if I told you that the Prophets were once a decadent, sensuous, and beautiful species? Well, today I'm going to forever change the way that you look at the Prophets. You may not thank me for it, you may even come to hate me for the thoughts that I'm about to put into your head. But hey, don't shoot the messenger. This is the extremely strange and, at times, rather disturbing history of Halo's Prophets. So, the Prophets weren't always prophets. A very long time ago, their species, their culture, their society, you name it, were all radically different to what we know of them now. The Prophets, or species name Sanshayum, were a dominant player in the galaxy hundreds of thousands, potentially even millions of years ago. During the Forerunner era of the galaxy, the Sanshayum were one of the three dominant species alongside the Forerunners and, of course, ancient humanity, and so they were incredibly technologically advanced. Native to the world of Janjaquam, the ancient Sanshayum were an impressive race who became spacefaring all on their own, mining the gas clouds of their star system to provide fuel for their early ships. They were also adept at time manipulation, not time travel or anything crazy like that, but rather time dilation. They created the time bolt that the ancient humans would use to imprison the Primordial by essentially freezing time within its capsule. Sanshayum science was so advanced, in fact, that despite the Forerunners being described by the Didact as a species who didn't like living with other species, even they considered their science extraordinary, which is extraordinarily high praise, if you'll pardon the pun. And if you can believe it, at this time in the galaxy, humanity and the Sanshayum were actually allies, incredibly strong allies at that. Although, to caveat that, the Didact did believe that this alliance wouldn't last forever, and that eventually the humans, the strongest species of the two, would eventually annihilate the Sanshayum, although that never came to pass for reasons that we'll discover soon. But I know that you didn't click on this video to learn about the technological prowess of a bunch of old men in space wheelchairs. You want to get down and dirty in more ways than one. Well, the Sanshayum weren't a species that were naturally inclined to war. Rather, they wished to spend their time living in peaceful luxury. They smoked stimulants through foreigner devices known as herbal synthesizers, basically modern-day hookah, to help them stay awake during long nights of religious study and sermon. Fruits, herbs, and spices would be ground down using a pestle and mortar before being smoked as something of an ancient upper, often causing hangovers and banging headaches the day after. They were also partial to herbal teas as well, which were served on high charity and flavoured with sea flower and sky spice. As for their physical appearance, we don't know for 100% certainty what the original ancient Sanshayum actually looked like. However, both the humans and the Foreigners considered them, and you might want to brace yourself for this, a sleek, beautiful race, strong and sensual, capable of seducing other species with their almost universal beauty. Slippery indeed. Around the Sanshayum, it seemed, all emotions melted into uncritical passion. So, hedonism was the main attribute of the ancient prophets, which they pursued in many ways, through the stimulants and exotic teas that we mentioned earlier, through the art of intoxication, developing alcoholic beverages such as Kastner, which was a pungent, sweet and sour green liquor, and also through romance. To sum it up shortly, the ancient Sanshayum were basically hyper-advanced, long-necked, ancient alien space hippies. The Didact described them as a handsome, intelligent race, besotted with eternal sexuality and youth. And the Librarian considered them decadent and beautiful. Now, don't worry, this is merely chapter 1 of the Prophet's extremely strange history, but that is, unfortunately, or many would say fortunately, all we know about the prehistoric Sanshayum and their unique beauty and seduction powers. That part of Halo has never really been expanded on much outside of Cryptum and also a little bit in Broken Circle, likely because most writers don't wake up in the morning and think, yes, today I'm going to spend 8 hours writing about how sexy these ancient aliens are. Greg Bear was just built different. May he rest in peace. But the bottom line of their prehistoric existence was that the prophets were such beautiful specimens that individuals from any species that possessed critical thinking would be besotted with their beauty and would fall victim to their passionate seduction. Christ almighty. So, for the theorists out there, and yes, I know for a fact there are some of you thinking this very thing right now, I know you are, there is a chance that canonically, at some point in history, in the Halo universe, an ancient prophet bumped uglies with a human. Do with that information what you will. I will kindly ask you to subscribe, as I am very painfully close to 600,000 subscribers, and then I will move very swiftly on to talk about the next majorly strange part of the prophet's history. Quick reminder that I've partnered up with Apex Gaming PCs to create my own line of Flood-themed PCs. From the Pure Form to the Gravemind and the Primordial build, these bad boys are perfectly suited for you to beat Regret's meat at the highest of frame rates and the most beautiful of resolutions. Link in the description. Moving very swiftly on, when the Foreigners defeated ancient humanity, the ancient Sanshayum were left stranded on their own, a war-averse species that had lost a war. However, knowing this, the Foreigners made a pact, something of a treaty with them. They wouldn't be utterly destroyed and reset back to a primitive age like humanity, but rather would have their space restricted to 3 planets, encompassed by a quarantine shield, surveilled at all times by the Foreigners. And for a time, this worked. They were able to regain a comfortable existence with light commerce and travel between 2 adjacent worlds and their moons. In the beginning, it seemed as though a full historical recovery was on the cards for them. Their society did change, however. There were new sheriffs in charge. No longer was their culture driven by pleasure and hedonism. Now, those that struck a resemblance to their former selves were seen as the lower classes, who bent the knee to their new religious elders, the Sanshayum prophets. These prophets bore none of the legendary sensuous beauty that their predecessors once had. Instead, they were decrepit-looking elders that used wheelchairs to move, their heads and shoulders burdened by broad ornamental helmets with widespread wings, and their personalities bitter and zealous. These decrepit elders were the revolutionaries of this rather strange era in Sanshayum history. However, the end of these Sanshayum was near. The librarian, who knew full well that the Flood's pressing advance on the galaxy would ultimately result in, well, the end of everything, sought to catalogue as many species as possible so that once the Halos were fired, they could be reseeded, and the Sanshayum were no different. However, when she went to Janjaquam to take a few of them to catalogue, she didn't exactly leave the rest of them with any degree of optimism. She turned up at their planet, took a few of the Sanshayum, and then left, leading the rest of them to believe that whatever they did, destruction would soon be upon them, and thus they reacted as any civilized species with this belief would. Using weapons and ships that they'd secretly been stockpiling on their 3rd planet, they took up arms against their foreign overseers in rebellion to protect their heritage and their children. They knew the Foreigners couldn't defeat the Flood, that which they and the humans had actually managed to push back, and so they wanted their fate to be in their own hands, not those of a doomed species. But, believe it or not, this rebellion didn't work. In retaliation, Faber, the creator of the Halo Rings, sterilized the Sanshayum quarantine zone with a halo, annihilating all of those who remained. The only survivors were the few that the librarian had catalogued to continue their species' legacy beyond the firing of the rings. Now, we don't know for sure which Sanshayum were taken by the librarian to be catalogued, but we can rather safely assume that it was the Elder Prophets, because the youthful and elegant Sanshayum were never seen again. After the Halos were fired, and the Prophets, as we can technically now call them, were reseeded, their advancement as a species occurred rather quickly thanks to the litany of Foreigner relics left behind on their homeworld of Janjaquam. However, it was these very relics that would ultimately fracture their species' population and culture. One group of prophets, known as the Stoics, worshipped the foreigners so devoutly they believed that nobody should be able to interact or study them. The other group, the Reformists, were quite the opposite. They believed that the foreigners had transcended to become gods by firing the halos, and so they wanted to follow in their footsteps. The clashing of these two diametrically opposed belief systems eventually came to a head in 2200 BC, sparking the War of Wills, a civil war that fractured the prophet society forevermore. After a long and bloody conflict, a group of heavily armed reformists barricaded themselves inside the Anodyne Spirit keyship, the center of the conflict, which, in times past, they had covertly filled with supplies and resources to survive. This ended up being a gigabrain move because they knew that the last thing the Stoics would ever do was try and interface with the keyship, let alone stop blowing holes in it to get them out. That was extreme blasphemy to them. It was the complete opposite of what they believed. And so, a stalemate began, which only ended when the Reformists somehow figured out how to activate the Dreadnought, tearing out part of the ground it was attached to and leaving Janjaquam forever. This marked the end of the war, which technically the Reformists won, but honestly, if you ask me, I don't think there really was a clear winner here. This keyship, by the way, is the very same one that we see at the center of High Charity in Halo 2 that houses Mendicant Bias, and that comes to Earth to activate the Ark portal before heading to the Ark in Halo 3. However, the Reformist victory came with a rather awkward caveat. Their population had been reduced to merely 1,000 individuals, and so when it came to increasing that population so that they could become a thriving community and ultimately embark on the great journey, they were hindered by something that I never in a million years thought I would ever be talking about in a Halo lore video. Incest. But don't worry, to prevent any prophets from unfortunately getting stuck in washing machines, the leaders had a plan. The Roll of Celibates. This was essentially a list of prophets who were prohibited from breeding because their genes were considered too common, and spreading them further would reduce genetic diversity. It was also used to ensure that negative recessive genes weren't passed down through generations, so in a way it was a form of eugenics. And you'll never guess who was on the Roll of Celibates. Why, none other than the boss man himself, the Prophet of Truth. But just because they were on the roll didn't mean that a prophet couldn't get laid. It was relatively common for celibate, and I say that in air quotes, celibate prophets to have concubines. Prophets with benefits, if you will. Truth, for example, had quite a few that would come over to, great journey and chill with him, shall we say. But problems began to arise if one of these concubines fell pregnant. You see, the Roll of Celibates was very strictly enforced, and if a pregnancy were to happen, an abortion or killing of the child at birth was to be carried out. Problems arose, however, when prophets began to fall in love with their concubines, which is what happened with the Prophet of Restraint, one of the three hierarchs that preceded Truth, Mercy, and Regret. Restraint impregnated one of his PWBs, his prophets with benefit, who Regret referred to, brace yourself, Regret was never a nice guy, but this might just cement it. Regret referred to this concubine as a whore, a dull-eyed monstrosity, and said that if she had a neck, I could not distinguish it from her folds. So, yeah, as you can tell, Regret's always just been a stand-up, debonair gentleman. The guy never changed. But the problem went beyond the pregnancy. Not only did Restraint lie to the female about his status as a member of the Roll of Celibates, but she was also a first-time mother, so of course she didn't want to lose her child. Besotted with her, he demanded that she be able to keep her brood. And so, Truth, being a fellow celibate, gave an impassioned speech arguing for greater investment into gene therapy and other technologies to, in his words, end the tyranny of the Roll. But this was merely one of the many examples of Truth's sharp political intellect. He made Restraint believe that the two were brothers in belief. Then, Restraint came to him, who, at the time, Restraint was Truth's superior, with a proposition. If Truth claimed Restraint's child as his own, he could earn any ministerial posting of his choosing. Truth's plan had worked, but he wanted more than to just be another minister. He wanted to be a hierarch. So, he conspired with Regret to blackmail Restraint. Luckily, this ordeal had not yet gone public, but should it do so, it would be a scandal of, well, galactic proportions. A hierarch defying one of the strictest rules in the Prophet history? Man, it'd be game over for Restraint. His child would be killed, he'd be dismissed as a hierarch, and hell, potentially even sterilized as well. So, Truth and Regret came to Restraint with a counteroffer. You step willingly from your throne, and we shall keep this scandal quiet. And that's precisely what he did. The Hierarch, Prophet of Restraint, stepped down as one of the 3 great Hierarchs of the Covenant, causing his 2 fellow Hierarchs, the Prophet of Obligation and the Prophet of Tolerance, to step down as well. And they were replaced by the Prophets of Truth, Mercy, and Regret. So, next time you play Halo 2 or Halo 3, just remember that those prophets are only there, and also, by extension, the Human Covenant War only happened because a prophet couldn't keep it in his pants. Yet another reason why Joseph Staten is God's gift to Halo. The rest is, of course, history. Truth, Mercy, and Regret led the Covenant from 2525 until the end of the war in 2552. But there are 2 more strange elements of the prophets that I want to touch on before we round the video out, the first of which being the prelates. Now, I mentioned prophet gene therapy earlier, and although Truth was only just waxing lyrical about it to further his ascent to power, gene therapy was actually employed later in the war alongside other physical and chemical therapies to create prophet super soldiers, with the intent for them to rival the Spartans. These super soldiers were called prelates, prophets with altered minds and bodies, extensive combat training, and equipped with advanced power armor complete with an anti-gravity belt, a hard-light crescent blade and shield, and that could secrete chemicals into their bloodstream to augment their abilities. Prelates were highly agile and mobile, and often favoured Covenant particle rifles if they were to take a firearm into battle. But the biggest perk of being a prelate is that they were even able to remove themselves from the role of celibates following their augmentation, so they could finally get down and dirty again, as long as the augmentations didn't, interfere with anything. Now, although the prelates were first mentioned by Bungie in the lore for the Halo 2 map Gemini, they actually weren't seen again in Halo's lore at all until 11 years later when the king, Joe Staten, returned to write Shadow of Intent. It turned out the reason that we hadn't seen them for so long was because most of them were killed during the war on Delta Halo, but they actually had a ton of presence in the background of Halo 2. When the Hierarch started to plan the Great Schism, the prelates were assigned to brute ships to supervise them and, in secret, upgrade them, ready for the impending war with the elites. Then, when the Great Schism began, the prelates were very quick to enter the battle, surprise attacking the elite ships that had surrounded High Charity before being distracted by the arrival of the Flood. When the Allied elites formed their blockade around the Holy City to prevent the parasite from escaping, they killed a significant number of prelates and also regular prophets. But there was one prelate who was working in secret to prevent the extinction of his race. And that brings me to the second of the 2 final strange things that I want to talk about regarding the prophets. Now, okay, granted this one isn't exactly strange, but I want to talk about it anyway, so sue me, okay? And that's what happened to the prophets after the fall of the Covenant. So, this prelate, Das Basvod, was not only a member of the Silent Shadow, but was also one of Truth's personal prelate assassins. Using Truth's departure from the Holy City as a distraction, Basvod helped to organize the evacuation of the remaining prophets from High Charity in their own flotilla of ships. You see, at this point in the war, the prophet population was already dangerously low, so it was vital that the few who still lived be sheltered. The plan was for this flotilla to travel to the shield world of Cloister, where they could shelter from Truth firing the Halos, and then begin again anew, as their ancestors once had following their activation. Now, we know for a fact that Basvod was successful in sneaking the prophets out of High Charity alive, and also that his flotilla is still out there somewhere. Whether they made it to Cloister or not, sadly nobody knows, but Artas Vadum has made it his and the Shadow of Intent's mission to hunt down this flotilla, wherever it may be, and exterminate the prophets to the last for their war crimes. A mission that is still ongoing, and actually that we've not heard anything about for quite some time now. So, after the fall of the Covenant, the prophets snuck away in secrecy with hopes of starting anew, but Halfjaw's got something different in mind. And that, my friends, is the incredibly strange, rather disturbing, kind of cursed, and incredibly lewd history of the prophets. I started this video with the intent to forever change the way that you look at these wrinkly ballsack chin zealots, and you know, I think thanks to the legendary writing of Greg Bear and Joseph Staten, I have a feeling I may have just managed that. So I hope you guys enjoyed yet another peculiar and rather cursed venture into some of Halo's deepest lore. I want to give a huge thank you to Michael McKeithan for becoming a new iconic one over on Patreon. Thank you very much, my friend. What an interesting video to be ordained as an iconic one in. Interesting the term I'm going to go with there. Thank you very much, my dude. And also, thank you very much to everyone else who continues to support me over there as well. And thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll catch you all in the next one.